Hi, my loves, and welcome back to I'm on Your Side with me, your host, Sierra Boudreau. Happy episode 2 of season 2. You guys, we have so much to get into today. I have the outline next to me, and there are 4 pages worth of stuff to talk about that I ferociously typed this morning. And I'm so excited about this episode because I asked on Instagram this morning if you guys would rather me talk about my experience with getting off of birth control this week or my experience with the home ownership, home buying process. And it was split pretty evenly 50-50, but I decided to go ahead and talk about the home ownership process because it's one of those things, or the home buying process, excuse me, because it's one of those things where the more that I get into my journey with being off of birth control, the more experience that I have and the more stuff that I have to say. But the further and further away that I am from when I bought the home, the less fresh everything is in my mind. And so I wanted to make sure that I was coming to you guys and talking to you guys about it when I still remembered everything so clearly, because it's only been a month and I just didn't want to put it off until later in the season or even a couple of weeks, because I just think that so much goes on within the span of a couple of weeks or a month, and I didn't want to forget any detail. I want to give you guys every single bit of information that I have. When I started the process of buying a house, I was online every single day trying to scour the internet for information about home buying and ownership and all of that, and it just felt like there wasn't anything out there that was extremely detailed, getting into the very nitty gritty of it. It all seemed kind of super flowery, oh, this was a great experience and so perfect and I loved it so much, or just super negative, I really hope I never have to do this again, this really destroyed me emotionally, financially. I felt like there wasn't a lot of content of people just being in between of those things and understanding there were great parts of the home buying process and really hard parts of the home buying process. And also, it's just so much more rare for a young woman to buy a house by herself. I'm 25. I bought the house completely independently. I didn't have any help from my boyfriend or from my parents or family or anything like that. I bought the house completely by myself, and I'm so proud of that and so thankful that I get to say that that's true. But there's just not a lot of content out there from women who share that experience because of various reasons, right? That's a whole different episode, getting into why young women feel really intimidated or blocked out from the home ownership process, because it is really intimidating in and of itself. And then also to be a woman, and then also to be a young woman, there's just a lot of hurdles and barriers to cross. And so I completely understand why there's not a lot of content out there about it, but I just wanted to share because I've been through it. And also, just being a Black woman, I didn't really talk about this online in the way that I wanted to, because it was a thought that I had and I wanted to make sure that I articulated it clearly and fully. But then, everything just happened with the house. There was so much that I had to do, and my mind wasn't in the place to make the content that I wanted to or say exactly what I wanted to. But it is so important to me, you guys, that I, as a young Black woman, share about my success and my joys and things like buying my first house at 25, things like being in a healthy, committed relationship where I really am not trying to hide anything from you guys or only show you guys the highlight reel, really being honest about the fact that there are actually good, long-term, healthy relationships out there. And I find it really important because it seems like every other day we are seeing a young, conventionally attractive white woman rise through the ranks to, internet fame and notoriety, and she goes from living in her small hometown to spending, $15,000 a month on New York City rent or buying this multi-million-dollar house. It seems like that's happening all of the time, and I am not hating on that experience that they're having. I think I want to support all women for achieving our dreams and, breaking the barrier of independent wealth and all of those. I love seeing that so much. And also, we cannot deny the fact that we see that happen for white women exponentially more than we see it happen for Black women. And as my Black female audience continues to grow and grow, which I'm so thankful for in and of itself, but as that community continues to grow, people who look like me and sound like me and grew up like me, who have experiences like me, seeing or being able to share the fact that it can also happen for us is so important. It's, we talk about women need to stand together and band together. Absolutely. But the experience that a Black woman has and a white woman has and a Chinese woman has, all of these different groups, like the experiences that we have within our womanhood looks very, very different. And that's not something we can deny or brush under the rug just for the sake of, this unanimous feeling. I think that there are some parts of womanhood that we all experience, things that affect all of us, right? But then there's some parts that are very, very unique to your personal identity within womanhood. And as a Black woman, it can feel so discouraging because it seems like it happens for everyone else. It seems like everyone else gets these great houses, and these great relationships, and these great careers. And, when is it going to happen for us? And so it's really important for me to show that it can happen for us, and it is accessible for us, and that we really can build the life that we want. We deserve softness. We deserve gentleness. We deserve peace and patience. We deserve those things, and we can have those things if only we stop believing that we don't deserve those things. And if only we stop believing that we can't have those things. We need to completely erase that mindset. And it is a lot easier to erase that mindset when we actually see someone doing it. And it's not in theory. It's not, maybe one day this is going to happen for us. When we actually see it happen, we can then grab onto it and say, I've seen it, and so then I can become it. It's the same feeling I have with Vice President Harris running for president. And if she wins, which I hope so much that she wins, seeing a Black female president changes so much for Black women, Black girls everywhere, seeing that it can happen for us, not in theory, not the idea of, not maybe one day, but really if she should be elected, seeing that it is possible. And that's something that we can then aspire to be, because it is not completely unfeasible anymore. And I'm not comparing me buying my first house to Vice President Kamala Harris getting elected. Those are two completely different things, but you understand how actually they do have similarities. And so I just wanted to share that. And this is not to say that this content is not for anyone else. Like, this content is for everyone. I know that I have a male audience. I know that I have a much wider female audience. And obviously the entirety of that female audience isn't just Black women who are 25, who, have similar experiences to me. This content really is for everyone, but I wanted to make it known how important it is to me and why it's so important to me that I share this and share it with the enthusiasm that I do, because we don't get to see this happen every day in the same way that other groups get to see this happen every day. And so with that said, this episode is going to be all about the home buying process. I asked on Instagram if you guys would be okay with me splitting this episode into two, because originally it was going to be the home buying and home ownership all combined into one episode. But as I was writing out the outline, I realized there's no way that if I did those together, the episode wasn't going to end up being like 2.5 hours. And so I thought it would be best to split it, just because that makes it more digestible and just like better to listen to, more engaging to listen to when you are getting two distinctly different topics, where I can go further into detail, and actually get into the nitty gritty of it all, rather than just like skimping over information or trying to figure out what's important, what's not important. I think all of it's important. I think all of it is so, so important. And so this episode is going to be all about the home buying process, and I'm really excited to bring it to you. I just really feel so thankful, like as I was writing out this outline, feeling so thankful that this is something that I get to share with you guys, that this is an experience that is new to me, that I get to bring to you guys, and we get to kind of, in a way, experience it together, and I can help you guys with something or gain insight on something that maybe you don't have just yet, but you want, and because you want it, and because you're working towards it, you're gonna have it. It just means a lot to me, and I love this house. I am so thankful for this house. I'm so thankful for everything that I've learned and the month that I've been in this house. And so let's go ahead and get into the episode. So y'all were with me through a lot of the beginning process of this, from me thinking that Alex and I were going to move to maybe New York. We talked about that a little bit. I touched on it. I don't think I ever went fully into detail about our, desire to kind of move to New York. I don't even know if desire is really the right word, like maybe our plan, because it was more than a desire. Like, we were actively thinking that we are going to move to New York, and then we decided not to, just because when we really sat down and looked at everything, it just didn't seem like the best move for either of us career-wise. Sorry guys, as I was about to get like right into this episode, I just got the go live from this partnership I'm doing. Actually, it doesn't even need to be a secret because it'll be live by the time this episode goes live, but I'm working with Diet Coke, you guys, which is, if you have been following me for a really long time, then you know one of my earlier biggest videos was about Diet Coke. I used to make a lot of Diet Coke content, honestly, and then I stopped because I had other stuff to talk about, but I used to make a lot of Diet Coke content, and it's just so crazy how years later I'm like actually working with them on a campaign, but the campaign was pretty quick turn, and so, which is fine. I had the time to do it and like really had the desire to do it. And so I'm glad that I got the opportunity, but it's going live right now. I just got to go live and I want to make sure that I can get it live before I get into the thick of this episode so that it doesn't have to go live in a couple of hours and it can just be there now. So that's what I'm doing, but we will resume the episode in quite literally just a second. So where was I? We were talking about the possible move to New York, and the reason we didn't go because like we just decided, Alex and I being the we, decided that for our careers, it just wasn't the best move. Alex wants to go back to school to do something different within the airline industry, and I'm so excited for him and so proud of him. And I also, just being an influencer, I think I struggled a little bit with this idea of being a small fish in a really big pond. I think that in New York, it's just a very different industry than it is in Denver or than it is in Texas. And I really struggled with, maybe I go there and then I really am not that different or that special, or people don't really want to follow me now that I live in New York and now that my content is going to inevitably change. And so I think I would have been happy there. I think that there is a big part of me that would have been happy there. I think it's one of those things that you just don't know what you don't know, and it could have been incredible or it could have been really, really hard. And I think the reality is it would have been a healthy mix of both, right? I think that I could have grown a lot and built a lot there, but I also think that I'm growing a lot and building a lot in Texas. I think that I could have grown a lot and built a lot should I have stayed in Denver. I don't think that my growth, my development, and me achieving my goals is necessarily dependent on where I am. Sure, opportunities look different in different places, but I don't know that the magic recipe is where I live. I think that the magic recipe is simply myself. And so we chose not to do New York, and we are kind of like back to the drawing board. Where do we want to go, or what is that going to look like? Because at the time, staying in Denver was not an option because they only had one school for what Alex wants to do, and it was outrageously expensive when we could have just gone somewhere else, tried something new or come back to Texas, or we could have just done something else and schooling would have been a lot less expensive, which just would have made sense. He would have gotten a better education for less money. The school there wasn't very good, and so it just, a lot of things were pointing us to leave Denver, and so that was our plan, was to leave. And then we were thinking about LA for a while, and I still kind of had some of those feelings of small fish, big pond, a little bit of that. But then we went to LA and I loved it. And Alex had previously lived in LA, and I lived in California in the Valley for a little bit of my life. From I want to say 2 to 9 is when my family and I lived in California. So I don't really remember too much of it. I don't have a ton of memories before moving to Texas at 10, which is a whole different thing we'll talk about in a whole different episode at some point. But I don't really remember California a lot. I have loose memories of it. But if somebody asks me where I'm from or where I grew up, I instinctively say Texas, just because I, really did grow up in Texas. I wouldn't say that I did a lot of growing up in California. And also, Texas just feels like home. Like if you ask my sister where she grew up, or, if you ask her where her home is, she's going to say Maryland, because she did a lot of her growing up in Maryland, even though I think by the end of it, by the end of her childhood, if you want to say that, she lived more life outside of Maryland than she did in Maryland, but it's just where home is. And so Texas felt like home, and California, I loved it so much, and I really did enjoy being there. And I thought, okay, maybe this could be great. But then we were on Zillow literally day in and day out, and there was nothing that I was seeing that I just loved. And I was going to have to make a lot of sacrifices to simply say that I lived in California. Obviously, it's more expensive. I know that there's state tax in California in the same way that there's state tax in Colorado, but I think California's is higher. And so that was just something to consider. And then Alex going to school full-time and working full-time, there was just a lot to consider about California. And then at the end of it, we decided, no, we're not going to do LA. And I felt pretty at peace with that decision. And so that started me thinking okay, maybe we will stay in Denver, because in the time between us thinking about LA, going to LA and coming back, a new school was set to open in Denver for what Alex wants to do. It was going to be less expensive. It was going to be a lot easier to get into. It was going to be better. And so we were thinking, okay, yeah, maybe we'll stay and do that. And the thing about Alex's school is that it's going to be a 3-year process. So wherever we decide or wherever he decides to go to school, we're going to be there for at least 3 years, maybe longer, but it's going to be at least 3 years. If I recall correctly, I talked about my move away from Denver and kind of how I was feeling ready to go towards the end of season 1. And I talked about it a lot in last week's episode. So if you want to go back and listen to that and get more detail about my decision to leave Denver, then that's there for you. But the idea of buying a house in Denver and staying there for another 3 years just didn't sit right with me. It didn't settle right with me. It didn't make me excited. It made me that happy. But I was like, okay, maybe I could just give it a chance. Like maybe I'm going to, look at homes and see if there's anything out there for me, see if there's anything that I really like. And the process went really quickly. From the time that I decided to start looking at buying a house to the time that I ended up closing on one, I think like complete beginning to end, it was about 2 months, maybe a little more than that. From me deciding to buy a house in Texas, that was shorter. I think that was about 1 month, but the whole process, I'm pretty sure, was 2 months. And so it happened very, very quickly from thinking, okay, maybe New York, maybe LA, maybe staying in Denver, never, like all of it was very, very quick. And I fully believe that I made the best decisions that I could, and I'm really happy with the decisions that I ended up making. That said, it was a very fast process. And so I started looking at houses in Denver, and I reached out to my friend who's a realtor. And I was like, okay, hey, I want to look at some houses. If you could like pull something for me and we can go see them, that'd be great. And she was like, yeah, absolutely. But she was moving at the end of the month that I started looking. And so she was like, I can take you on, the original showings. And then after that, if you want to see more, I can set you up with one of my colleagues and, all of that. And I was like, okay, yeah, that sounds great. And so we had planned to see some houses, I think the next week after I had reached out. But I was really impatient and I was living on Zillow, and I saw some houses on Zillow that I was like, oh, I think I could really like these. And they were in the neighborhood that I wanted to be in. If you're familiar with Denver at all, I wanted to be kind of towards the Highlands area, maybe Sunnyside, maybe Arvada. Like I wanted to be kind of in that area of Denver. And at the time I lived in Cherry Creek. Once again, if you're familiar with Denver, I lived in the 9 in Colorado area. Loved that area so much, but I didn't really want to buy there, I didn't think. And also there just wasn't a lot to buy there because you were pushing right up against Cherry Creek, and Cherry Creek is $2 million, $3 million homes, and that's just like not what I was in the mood to spend at the time. And so I was thinking Highlands, and all of my friends lived in the Highlands. It seemed great. And so I go tour these houses, and I just did not like them, you guys. They were so expensive, like upwards of $700, $800, which is not the problem in and of itself. The problem is that you are getting these really rundown houses, these really old houses, these houses that aren't kept up with, these houses that aren't on the best streets. I mean, you're paying that much money and not absolutely falling in love with a house. It's like you are paying the money and realizing you're going to have to put a lot of work into it to make it what you want. And that's not what I wanted, because I'm going to be honest, I'm not really like a classic house kind of girl. I don't want, the 1950s bungalow. Like that's not me. That's not my story. And some people love that style of house, but that's just not what I really wanted. And so it was kind of like, do I buy one of these houses and then know that I'm going to have to spend 50, 60, 100K more so that I can make it exactly what I want, but then I'm taking away the historical feel of it where somebody else could come in and just love that, and that's their dream house. Like what I would take and turn into something else that it never was even meant to be, somebody else could just buy and love right off the bat. And so I didn't love that feeling. I toured, I think like 5 or 6 houses in Denver. And then there's one that I went to go tour with my realtor friend, and I really liked it. Like I really, really did like it. For reference, the house that I was touring in Denver that I really liked and the house that I bought in Texas were the same price, within maybe 10 to 15K. If I remember correctly, they were like right around the same price. And for that house compared to what this house is, it is just absolutely insane. It's like a night and day difference. Like that house would be really, I would qualify it as a starter home, a nice home, but like a starter home, a home that we would probably have to, should we have kids, like move out of that house to get a bigger house, should just things come up in life. One of our parents gets really sick and needs live-in care, like things that you don't want to think about, but should be thought about when you are investing that much money into property. And I just didn't really want to buy a house that I knew I was going to have to move out of. My whole intention with buying a house is I want options. I want to be able to stay here if we want to stay here. And I also want to be able to leave should I want to leave. Like I want options. And the best way I knew to give us options was to buy something that we didn't have to leave for any reason, and the house that I ended up buying, we'll get into all that. But back to the house in Denver, I liked it. And I thought, maybe I'll place an offer on this. I don't know, but I wasn't just like overwhelming. Yes, like this is the one. And Alex and I talked about it and I was like, yeah, I like it. I just don't really think I want to be in Denver long term. I don't really think that I want to buy this house like right off the bat. And also, there were things in the house before we even got to the inspection that me and my realtor knew that we were going to have to like fix up or do to the house. And so that was like hard to look at. Like, I already know that there is like thousands of dollars worth of work that needs to be done. And that's not even really getting into like what's under the house. We're not looking at the foundation right now. We're not looking at the roof right now. We're not looking at the electrical right now. We're not looking at, all of these things right now, things that probably are going to come up, because what I've learned through this entire home buying process is that what you see is not typically what you get. What you see is only what you see. There are so many things in the house, especially when you're a first-time home buyer, so many things that you don't even know to look for, which is why, you guys, I find it so important to have a realtor that you respect and that you trust. Because if you're going into this blind, and I mean completely blind, like no one in my family had bought a house before, no one in my immediate family had owned property before, and so I didn't even know what questions to ask. I didn't know really a starting point. I was really, really reliant on my realtor to be honest with me and want the best for me, which is a lot of trust to be putting in somebody when you're talking about something as expensive and life-changing as owning a home, owning your first home. And so we're looking at it and I was like, I don't think that I want to do this. And so Alex and I got to talking again and I was like, hey, I just think we should consider Texas a little bit more. I am looking at my 5-year plan. I'm looking at our life together, and I never left Texas thinking, okay, I'm never going to be back here again. I left Texas thinking this is for now. And I have loved Denver. I love what it gave me, but Denver was also just for the moment. And I think I'm ready to go back. And so Alex was like, okay, let's go fly down to Texas and, see what's going on there. And so I reached out to my friend who had recently bought a house, and I really liked her house, what I'd seen of it. And so I reached out to her and I was like, hey, do you have a realtor that you really enjoyed working with? I know that you bought a couple properties at this point. So, send me their number if you have somebody. And she's like, yes, absolutely. I have a realtor that I loved. I used her on both properties, all of this good stuff. And so she sent me her number and I reached out and I was like, hi, I'm looking to, actually, no, she connected us. My friend connected me to the realtor, put us all in a group chat, which is, I think, the best way to make an introduction like that, because it just establishes another layer of trust, because not only do I have a friend vouching for this realtor, but also just because realty is such a client-facing and people business that I felt a lot of confidence that she wasn't going to screw me over, because now she knows that me and this friend have a relationship, and should she my friend want to buy another property, if she screwed me over and was awful to me, odds are my friend isn't going to go back to her to buy another house. So I felt a lot of confidence that this was going to be a good relationship. And so she connected us, introduced us, and I reached out. Within the next week, Alex and I were on a flight to come down to look at houses. She pulled 12 houses for us. And that was really, really crazy. Seeing 12 houses at once was really a lot. Also, going back, I completely forgot to look at my outline. And there was a whole section I missed about getting pre-qualified, which I'm going to touch on right now. So I got pre-qualified in Denver when I was looking at houses in Denver. I was going through a lender that my realtor friend had set me up with. I thought he was nice. I thought he was fine. I just didn't really get the feeling that he was the shark that I wanted him to be, because he was a lender broker or a mortgage broker, I think is what they're called. And his job was to connect me with lenders who would take on my loan at the best rate. And so he was kind of shopping rates for me rather than me shopping rates by myself, which was a great setup because I didn't really have the time or the energy to shop a bunch of different lenders by myself. And so went through him and he came back with my pre-approval, and we were going at the time on a conventional loan. The plan was for me to do a conventional loan. Conventional loan is when you take your W-2s or your tax returns and you give them to a lender, and they kind of qualify you based on how much you made the year before and takes all that into consideration. But when that number came back, we realized that my 2023 taxes were right for 2023, obviously, but they didn't accurately reflect my 2024 income. And we were pretty far to 2024 at that point. And so I just really had a lot of confidence that my income was going to remain about the same or better. And so I was like, what options do we have with going off my bank statements? And he didn't really know too much about bank statement loans. He was kind of like, oh, well, I don't know. And so I was like, okay, well, that's not really reassuring, because I've done my research on bank statement loans and I know that I'm eligible for one. I know that I have the income to prove that I should have one, and all of that. And so a bank statement loan just is exactly as it sounds. It goes off of your bank statements. A lot of self-employed people do this because our bank statements more accurately reflect our income than our tax returns, because on taxes, you can, as you know, write things off. So I write off my business expenses. For instance, like when I started the podcast, I bought the camera, I bought the monitor, I bought the mic, I bought the mic pack, I bought all of the equipment to make the podcast the best that it could be. And that was quite the expense. And so I charged it to my business card, and then that became a write-off. We can write it off, and the write-off is not just saying like you aren't responsible for spending the money and the government's going to pay you back for it. That's not what it is. It is where you submit your expenses to the IRS and say like, this is a portion that I used for my business, and then you pay less income. So if all of my camera equipment, all of my podcast equipment was, let's say, $3,000, I would write that off as an expense to the IRS, and then my income would be $3,000 less. So I'm paying taxes on $3,000 less dollars, which is really great for writing things off and for business expenses, obviously, but not so great when you want to use your tax return for your home ownership or for buying a car, things like that, because your income looks like it's less than it actually was. Yes, I still made that money, but I'm paying less taxes on it. And what they're going off of on a conventional loan is basically what I paid taxes on, not what actually came to my bank account. So there can be discrepancies, small or large, depending on how much you and your CPA are writing off that given year. So I had a considerable amount of expenses for 2023 that I was able to write off. So I was like, okay, no, I don't think I want to go that route. And so when I decided to come to Texas and look at houses with my realtor here, the one that I ended up using, she set me up with her lender, which some people advise against using the lender your realtor gives you because it is honestly in their best interest. They often make money off of the deal. The lender broker or the mortgage broker makes money off the deal. The lender, the mortgage broker finds for you, makes money off the deal. It really is like a quote family business in that way, not necessarily that they're family, but that they are all connected financially. And so some people advise against it. I personally thought it was fine. I had a great experience using the mortgage broker. I had a great experience with the lender that they ended up finding me. It all worked out really, really well. I had no regrets, but you should shop around. That's one thing that I didn't really do. I didn't shop around a bunch. I just kind of went with what was presented to me. I think that maybe if I were to buy another property, I might shop around just a little bit more to see what's out there, because what the mortgage broker ends up doing is finding you a lender who gives you an interest rate based off of your income. So if you go conventional, based off of your tax returns. If you go bank statement loan, based off of your bank statements. And when you shop around, you can shop different interest rates. Some banks are going to give you a 7%. Some banks are going to give you a 6.3%. Some, depending if you go credit union, bank, if you go private, there's so many different options out there. I highly recommend doing more research on that if you are curious about how the mortgage broker lender side of the business works. But if you want to shop around, I would say shop around. If you just want to go with the person who's presented to you in the way that I see it, I had a great realtor, and so I trusted her recommendations. If I didn't trust my realtor, I probably wouldn't have trusted her lender. So, it kind of goes down the line like that. I know that I'm using lender and mortgage broker interchangeably, but I think I've explained it enough times to where you guys are picking up on what I'm saying when I say that. So ended up going with her lender and really had a great experience with that. And then I got my pre-qualification for the bank statement loan. And with that, it was obviously higher because of everything that I had just explained. And so I had a better idea of what I could actually shop around for, because I think that what a lot of people do is get in the trap of like, oh, maybe I could qualify for this because I put my information into some like one-off link that I found on Google that asked me how much I made that I could hypothetically be pre-qualified for. And so you're looking at these houses that are, actually outside of your budget, or you're looking at these houses that are on the way lower end of your budget, because these numbers, when not actually coming from a professional, are very, very skewed. They don't have all of the information that they need to have. And also, a lot of those things aren't taking into consideration the interest rate you're actually going to get. You can put in the average interest rate, which at any given time could be 5, 6, 7, 10, whatever it may be. So you can put in the average, but oftentimes your interest rate is going to be more or less the same around the average, but it's going to be specific to you based off of your finances, your credit history, your credit score, all of that stuff. And so it's really hard because a lot of people just kind of go in blind and they're like, oh, well, I thought I could afford this $1.5 million house because that's what the internet told me. And then the lender is like, no, babe, it was never going to be that. Maybe one day down the line, it is going to be that for you. Today, it's not that for you. And that really does mean something, because lenders are often going to pre-approve you for more than you can actually afford. This is advice you've probably heard everywhere. Everyone who talks about buying a house says this. Lenders are going to approve you for more than you can actually afford, because they don't have all of the information they need. And also, lenders don't know how much you have in reserves at the time that you're getting pre-qualified. Lenders often don't know your credit history looks like, in depth, like they're doing soft pulls, not hard pulls. And so there's a lot of missing information that can drastically change how much you can afford. And then depending on the lender you go with, they're going to have a different amount that they require you to have in reserves, which we're going to get into a little bit later in the episode. But one lender can require you to have a year of reserves. One lender can require you to have 2 months in reserves. And so that drastically changes what you can actually afford, because what you have in reserves is entirely separate from what you have to pay for the down payment and closing. You can't use your reserves for down payment or closing. Those are different expenses. And so we're going to get into that. But all of that to say, you're going to get pre-approved and you might be shocked by the number on the high end or the low end, or it could be exactly what you expected. But for the most part, from people that I talk to, a lot of times people get their pre-approval back and they're like, oh my God, I can afford so much. And then they start touring these houses, and when it gets down to it, they either have to back out of it or they have to be brought back down to earth and realize they can't actually afford it. Because when you actually start crunching the numbers and you get really specific with how much you need to have down payment, closing, reserves, things like that, and just what your comfortable safety net is. You don't want to buy a house and have literally $0 to your name after you buy the house, which is the point of reserves. But you want to be careful with things like that, because it can very, very quickly become a very bad financial decision. A lot of times people talk about home ownership and they say it's the best because you have equity. Equity is not cash on hand. You have to sell the house to get your equity, or you can take out a second mortgage on the home, which is something that we can talk about a different time. But your equity is not instantaneous. You can't go to the bank and withdraw equity the way that you can withdraw cash from your account. You have to sell the property. And so people talk about equity as if it's this great, great thing. And yeah, it is if you're willing to sell. But if you're not willing to sell your house, equity is really just a figment at that time. I went into the home buying process with my pre-approval. I got a really good idea of what I actually wanted to spend versus my pre-approval amount. And so I ended up spending $100K less than the top of my pre-approval. And that was really comfortable for me. Could I have gone up more? Sure. Could I have gone down more? Sure. But what I ended up buying my house for was really comfortable for me. I feel really good about it. I feel really good about my mortgage payment, my home insurance, all of that stuff. And so it ended up being a great decision for me. But we went through this process. We're in Texas. I had my pre-approval in hand. I know kind of what I want to spend. And I look at all these houses. We look at 12 houses, like I said. And I think it was the 8th or 9th house. Walked into it and I was like, yes, this is my house. This is the one. However, spoiler alert, as I talked to you guys about last season, when I kind of touched on the home buying process, that the woman who was selling the house was there at the time of the tour, which you would think, oh, not really a huge deal, right? However, because that's what we thought in the moment. We were like, oh, this is fine. Okay, if you want to show us around the house, that's fine. But she was showing us around the house in a way that she very much was showing us what she wanted us to see and then ushering us out of that area as soon as she stopped showing us a highlight reel of that room. And so there wasn't a lot of time to open up cabinets. There wasn't a lot of time to really look at things. And all of that to say, like, I didn't even really know what I was looking for at the time, which is why, once again, it's really important to have a realtor that has your best interest at heart, because at the end of the day, when the realtor helps you buy a house, they get paid, and they get paid from the listing agent. And so you're not paying your realtor. That's something that I didn't really know. And it was one of those things that I was like, I feel like I should know this by now, but I'm too embarrassed to ask. So like, I didn't want to ask my realtor how she was going to get paid. So I Googled it. And that's when I learned that your realtor gets paid from the listing agent, but they get paid once they make a sale. And so there are some skeezy realtors who are going to sell you this broken down shitty house that, you know, you really shouldn't have bought, because they still get their 3% or they still get their 4%, whatever it may be. You should look up the averages in your area. And also, do not be afraid to ask your realtor what their realtor fee is, because if the listing agent decides not to pay it or somehow negotiates a way out of paying it, you have to pay it. The realtor is going to get paid. And like I was saying earlier, this house I really, really liked, because it was one of those things where like, okay, we didn't have to move if we had kids. We didn't have to move for any reason, really. Like, this is a house that we could be in for the foreseeable future should we want to. Like, the neighborhood was great. The house on the surface looked great. I was so excited about it. It had this little like back house that her husband had made like a man cave or whatever, that I was going to completely gut and make my podcast studio and office. I was like so thrilled about this. We leave the house, we go see a couple others, and then I was like, no, that's the house, that's the one, write up the offer. And so my realtor writes up the offer, and we submit it that day. And they get back to us the next day, and we do one round of negotiations where they said like, hey, we see your offer. We offered, I want to say $20K under, and they came back and they were like, oh, with like some concessions. And then they came back and they were like, we will either give you the concessions at listing price, or we won't give you the concessions, but you can have it at asking. And so I believe that we moved forward with like somewhere in the middle. I think I came up $10K with the concessions, and then they took that. And so then we move on to the option period. Option period is, I believe, 7 days. Maybe that's something you can negotiate, but my option period was 7 days. And so that is from the day that the option period starts, which is, I believe, the day that you guys agree, like, I'm buying this house, and you go under contract, and then until the end of the midnight on the 7th day. This is the time that you submit your earnest money, which is 1% of the price that you guys agreed upon, and you get your inspection and things like that. You make sure that you really do want this house, because you can only get your earnest money back if you back out of the sale, if you break the contract within the option period. If you break it after the option period, you lose your earnest money, which can be a hefty chunk of change if the house is really expensive. If it's a $200,000 house, obviously the money is less. If it's $1 million house, obviously option money is more. And so, you know, you need to just consider these things when you're thinking about putting it down. And so I gave my 1%, got the inspection ordered. In the inspection, no matter what, you don't get inspection money back. Inspection is out-of-pocket expense, because that is just you doing your due diligence. I remember in 2020, a lot of people were waiving inspections, which is absolutely crazy to me, you guys, to waive an inspection. I know the market was different. I know people just wanted to get into a home. I know COVID scare, all of that stuff, but it absolutely is insane to me to waive an inspection. And I will tell you why. I ordered the inspection. They go in there. My realtor was like, this inspector is more expensive, but they are going to give you the details of the details. They're going to tell you everything that you need to know. They're not going to skimp on stuff. They're not going to try to just sell you the house. Like, they're really going to tell you what you need to know. So I paid for that inspection, and it was a couple $100s, I think like $400 or $500. And they go in there, and I wasn't able to go in for the inspection because I had some work stuff come up that week. And so wasn't able to fly in for the inspection. And I get the inspection report back the next morning, and I open it, and you guys, my heart just sinks. Mind you, I had never seen an inspection report before. I didn't even really know what I was looking at, but I knew it was bad. For someone who's never seen an inspection before to open it up and know that it was bad, you know that it was bad. Everything was red, red, red. I'm telling you guys, if you cheap out on the inspection, it is going to bite you later. Do not cheap out on your inspection, because even though I got a really bad quote inspection back, it was actually an incredible inspection. A bad inspection would have been one that didn't tell me what I needed to know about the actual state of the house. And then I bought the house, and then found all of it out later because then now I'm living in a money pit. That's a bad inspection. A good inspection might absolutely break your heart, but it is necessary to see. A good inspection is going to tell you everything that you need to know so you can go into it with clear eyes, know exactly what you're getting yourself into. And that's even to say that there might be some things the inspection doesn't get. So you have to understand getting a good inspector is always in your best interest. And so I'm scrolling through this, and then I text my realtor and I was like, hey, I know that I've never seen an inspection report before, and I don't want to, be an alarmist, but like, I can't buy this house, right? And she was like, no, like, you're not buying this house. This is not good. This is bad. So luckily we were still within the option period. So I was able to break the contract and get my earnest money back, which is great. It's not that you pay earnest money at the end of the option period. You pay it at the very beginning of the option period, and it's like your good faith deposit. And then I was looking at the Zillow listing again, and I was like so mad because I was like, I just feel like as a woman, like, why would you want to sell another young woman a really shitty rundown house? Why would you lie about all this stuff? She lied about so much stuff. And then I realized, not everyone is thinking like that. Like, not everyone cares about things like that. Women are not. And so I was able to get my money back, but I was looking at the Zillow listing because I wanted to see how quickly she relisted it, or, if she ended up lowering the price or whatever. And I noticed that the house had previously gone under contract and it was broken within the option period, which is, I don't want to say a red flag, but it's definitely a yellow one waving in the wind, because what that says is for some reason, somebody had decided they wanted to buy this house and then decided they didn't want to buy the house. And it really, why I say it's not red, but more so yellow, is because it could be anything. It could be, oh, I decided, I got cold feet. I don't want to buy the house anymore. Or it could be, they also got an awful inspection back because you don't share the inspection with the home seller. But if the home seller does get an inspection before they list their house, they are legally required to disclose everything that the inspection says. However, when I get an inspection, that's my property. That's my paperwork. That has nothing to do with the seller. If this other seller had gotten an inspection and it came back faulty or came back really negative, then the seller doesn't have to disclose that because that's not the inspection that they ordered, and you don't run the inspection by the seller, like, that's your business. And then, so it could be something as bad as an awful inspection, or it could be something as like, oh, we just decided not to buy anymore. It could really be anything. So you want to ask your realtor, hey, I'm seeing, or maybe they'll bring it to you. Somebody in the conversation should note that the house had previously been under contract. This isn't something I need to look for before. And so I did going forward, but you can say, hey, I see this house is under contract. Can we get some insight on the listing agent of like why the contract was broken? They might be honest. They might not be honest. I don't know. But a lot of times I found, or in the 2 times that I had gone through this process, that they're pretty honest, but we didn't ask the first time. We back out of it and I was like, okay, back to the drawing board. I'm going to take a day or 2 to collect myself, but because I really am sad, but like something about the house didn't feel perfect to me. After we placed the offer, I started to get this feeling of like, ooh, something's not sitting right, but I didn't know if it was just like the cold feet of buying my first house, which is a really big expense and really scary, and realizing, oh my God, I'm going to uproot my entire life. I'm no longer going to live in Denver. Not only am I no longer going to live in Denver, but I'm now going to live in a different state. And while I've lived in this state before and I love this state, it's also going from living in an apartment to living in a house. Like, there's a lot of changes. And so I didn't know if the feeling I was having was like cold feet about the house or cold feet about the move, or just like anxiety about all of it or whatever. So I pushed through it, but I was like, whatever is meant to happen, it's going to happen. And then that happened. And I knew that wasn't the house for me. And then I also really got to check on my feelings and realize it was simply about the house. It wasn't about the move. I wasn't getting cold feet or anxiety about the move. It was like that house wasn't my house. And that's what that feeling was trying to tell me. So then Alex and I fly back to Dallas the next week, and we see another large number of houses, and we're going through them, and then I find my house, you guys. And I walked in and immediately I was like, this house is why that house didn't work out. And like I told you guys earlier in the episode, this house and the house that I was looking at in Denver were right around the same price point. And this house has so much more. This house that I ended up buying has a pool, which I love, which we're going to get all into the pool in the home ownership episode, because there's a lot to say about owning a pool. But it has the pool, it has a 2-car garage, it has 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms. Like, this house is perfect. Like I was saying earlier, it gives me options. We can stay here, we can raise a family here, we can do what we need to do here. It's in a great school district. It has so much great stuff. And also, we could leave if we wanted to leave. So we were standing in the house, me, my realtor, and Alex, we were standing there and we were like, okay, what is our game plan? Because this is the one. Like, what do we have to do to get me in this house? And she was looking it up and she was like, okay, this house has been on the market for 40 plus days. So I think that there's room for negotiation here. I'm going to go back to the drawing board. I'm going to see what, we think is wise. And then I'm going to come to you. We're going to agree on something. Then we're going to place an offer. And I was like, yes, let's go. Let's do it. And then I was just like this ball of like excited energy. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't anxious. I was like, oh, it's happening. Like, this is the house. This is the one. And this is when it's all coming true. And that feeling that I had about like the fear of a shitty inspection went out the window. I completely forgot what I told myself, which, be guarded, wait until you actually have a good inspection to get excited about a house. I told myself, and yet it all went out the window when I saw this house. I was like, no, this is the one. It's going to come back with a clean inspection. It's going to be perfect. No worries at all in the world. I walked out of the house thinking like, I'll be back, babe. I'll be back when I own you. Don't even worry about it. So that all went out the window. We end up placing an offer on the house. We offered a little bit lower with some, concessions once again. And they came back and we negotiated, I want to say 3 times. It was kind of a longer negotiation process. This process was longer because the people selling this house actually put care and intention into this house and knew what it was worth and wanted it to be sold for what it was worth. And the other woman, like the negotiation process was probably so quick because she knew that she had an absolute lemon on her hands and just wanted to get it out the door, which is part of what pisses me off, knowing that you have a house in that condition and having the nerve to counter my very good offer for that house, countering that and saying, oh, not enough. Girl, you need to work on what's under the house, what's above the house, what's in the house. You need to work on the roaches in your sewer before you want to scoff at my offer. You know what I mean? And so that was crazy. But this process, we went back and forth 3 times. Alex and I ended up going on a trip. We went to Maine. And I remember we were standing in line for a lobster roll and I get a call from my realtor. Or my realtor's husband, they work as a team. And he was like, okay, here's what they said. They are willing to come down to this price and they are willing to make these concessions or give these credits. And, this is what it's going to be. And I was like, okay, this is when I have to make a decision. Like, am I going to push for more and know that if I push for more, I could lose the house? Or am I going to take this honestly very good offer and call it a day? So what it came down to was the offer and then also some credits that I wanted. My realtor team and I decided to go credits rather than asking them to really fix a lot of stuff, because oftentimes when you ask the sellers to fix things, they're going to hire the quickest and the cheapest on the market. They are not so worried about getting it up to the highest quality ever because, mind you, they're not living in it anymore, babe. Like, if you say you want a new roof and they somehow agree to give you a new roof, babe, they are going on thumbtack.com and saying roofer near me, and they're getting a crew out here to hammer and nail your new shingles in. Like, they're not so worried about it being high quality or lasting that long or, really whatever. So you have to be worried about those kinds of things. But also you have to remember that you are buying a used house. You are not buying, for the most part, unless you're buying a new build, which comes with its own set of issues and struggles and whatever. Unless you are buying a new build, you are buying a used house. So you cannot expect the people selling you this house to be giving you a pristine, freshly built, perfectly conditioned house. The house has been lived in. The house has stuff that probably needs to be updated or replaced. And this is all stuff you're going to find out in your inspection. But my advice is don't be so scared of moving into a lived-in house. The only thing you should be scared about is the things that you have decided are hard-nosed. And I want to rephrase, you don't need to be scared of that at all, but just be mindful. And one piece of advice that I have is when you open up the inspection, go into it knowing what your hard no's are. Things that if you see them on the inspection, you're walking away from the house, because it is very easy, very, very easy to open up an inspection report and you are just so excited and so hopeful about getting into that home that you're willing to excuse things that you don't really want to excuse. For example, one of my hard no's, termites. I don't fuck with termites. If termites are on the inspection report, I'm walking away from the house. I'm not doing it because I do not want to deal with the termite problem, because once you introduce termites to the home, getting them fully gone is such a headache. It's expensive and it's time consuming and it's emotionally draining. Like, dealing with any kind of persistent pest is very, very draining, but termites is a whole different level. That is a hard no for me. Another hard no for me, foundation issues that haven't been repaired at all. Like, if you get the inspection report and they're like, this foundation is crumbling, we are seeing cracks all around the house. Like, there are struggles with this foundation and they haven't attempted at all to repair it or fix it up. No, I'm not doing it. That you want to make sure, if they're saying, oh, we have a warranty, make sure that they make sure that that warranty transfers, because sometimes they'll have a warranty for as long as they live in the house. Like with the pool, which we'll talk more about in the next episode, but with the pool, when I do the remodel, the warranty for the plastering that I'm going with is for as long as I live in the house. But if I sell the house, the warranty is then void. So it would be shitty for me to be like, oh yeah, the pool plaster is under warranty, knowing that it's only under warranty for as long as I live in the house, because it's not a lie. I still do have warranty on it. However, the warranty is not transferable. It's like when buying a house, you have to really, really pay attention to the language, because there are things that can so screw you over if you don't know what you're listening for or looking for, which is why it's important to do your due diligence. I have really raved about having a good realtor, but also just make sure that you do your research. Make sure that you are tuned in to what's going on, because you are buying this house, which is, for a lot of us, the biggest financial commitment we will make in a very, very long time, maybe in our entire lives, depending on how you want the rest of your life to plan out. And so you want to make sure that you just know what you're talking about. So I go under contract and I'm giddy, I'm excited. I got the credits that I wanted. I got a good price on the house that I wanted. And we go under contract, and then I get the inspection, you guys. And this inspection came back great. It came back great. There were some things I was like, oh, we actually need more money for that. And I asked for more money and they gave more money, and which was great. And so, but the bones of the house were great. It didn't have any of my hardcore no's on it, which was great. Clean sewer. And another thing that I don't think I stressed enough earlier is that you want to get every inspection you possibly can within that 7 days. I know that it adds up, but it is so worth it. If there's a pool in my backyard, you need a separate pool inspection. Do not just trust your inspector to give you a very detailed and thorough pool inspection, because you have to remember that inspectors come out and they have a lot of knowledge, but a lot of broad knowledge. They don't have a lot of very detailed knowledge on very niche things. Like, your pool needs its own inspection. I would say that your electrical box probably should get its own inspection, or not just the box, like the entire electrical in the house. If the actual inspection comes back and there's like some questionable things on the electrical, I'm not saying you have to like go out first thing and get it, but if there's questionable things on the overall inspection, then go ahead and spend that money and get that extra inspection. If the roof is really old, get a roof inspection. Things like that. Like, you want to make sure that you are as protected as you possibly can. So the inspection came back. It was great. I ended up getting an additional pool inspection. I got an electrical inspection, and then I got the sewage inspection, but the sewage inspection was included in the like overall inspection. And so that was great. Everything came back great. None of my hard no's on the list. I was like, let's move forward. And which is great, because I still had a lot of time left in my option period to decide if I wanted to, and I had already known I wanted to. And so we moved forward with it. Option period closed. At this point, if I wanted to break contract, I would lose my earnest money, and I would obviously have lost all of that inspection money. And so at this point, I had paid for 2 inspections, like obviously more with the pool and blah, 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 but like 2 overall inspections, 1 on the previous house and 1 on this one. Best money I spent. So glad I did it. Would do it again in a heartbeat. And so that's money you don't get back. Moving forward, we go through the process. Now let's talk about lending, you guys. Interlending, stage left. The thing about it is that when you get pre-approved, you don't really hear much for a little bit, because you don't know what house you're going to end up going with. There might be whispers about, your interest rate, and some people might say lock your interest rate as soon as you can. I personally would not say lock your interest rate as soon as you can, because interest rates can change every single day. You never know what's going to come up. Once you get a good one and you and your lender decide like this is a good one, we are comfortable with this, go ahead and lock it, but do that very, very close to when you close. Don't do it immediately because you could lock in at an 8% and then 3 weeks later, it could go down to a 2%. Not that we've seen 2% interest rates, in a very, very long time, maybe ever, I don't know. But not that we've seen that, but like it could, hypothetically, anything really could happen, especially around like the election and things like that, especially now that they're expecting rate drops, all of that. So I just am not an advocate for locking your rate as soon as you possibly can. Just be patient with that. But we move forward and lending comes up. And now they want to know everything about my finances. They want to know where the money came in, where the money is going, who the money came from, who that Venmo was to, what my credit history looks like, what my credit score looks like. Why does my credit score look that way? Like they want to know every single thing. Luckily, when going through the home buying process, had a credit score of over 800. So my credit score was not getting in the way of anything. Because of my credit score, I was able to get a good interest rate, things like that. And so, but going back to when I told you guys that I got a bank statement loan, the thing about the bank statement loan is that your interest rate is going to be higher because they are taking a bigger risk on you, right? With your tax returns and W-2s and things like that you would submit, you are making the same amount of money consistently because that's what that shows. But with the bank statement loan, 1 month you could pull in this much money, and the next month you could pull in this much money, and they're taking an average of that, right? But they're still taking a really big risk because being self-employed is not the most stable journey in the world. All of you that are self-employed or know someone who is self-employed, whatever, knows that like being self-employed is in of itself very risky. And so lenders are also like, hey, I'm giving you hundreds of thousands of dollars. We're going to hike up that interest rate because I want to make sure that I'm protected, which is fair, babe. If you need to do what you need to do, go ahead and do it. So that said, it could have been so much worse, but my interest rate came in at a 7%. So I felt pretty good about that. And speaking of that, we are going ahead next year gonna switch me over to a conventional loan when I can refinance. And so that's something you want to ask your lender about. They offer free refinancing because what can happen is you get this interest rate and then you can refinance after 6 months, anytime after 6 months. But it can be quite the expense or it can be free if your lender offers it for free. I'm grateful that my lender offers it for free because when I file my taxes for this year, it's gonna more closely reflect the money that I made this year. And I asked my lender, how much money do I need to have on my tax return to afford the house that I just bought with my bank statement loan? He gave me the number. The number is very attainable. It was already attained. And so I know that I'm clear to move over to a conventional loan next year. I did what's called a 2-1 buy down. The 2-1 buy down is really quite simple when you break it down, but I didn't really know what it was. And so what it is that you pay a certain amount of money, whatever that amount of money is. Mine was a little less than $20K. You pay a certain amount of money and that gives you a lower interest rate for the first year. So 7% for my first year, 8% for my next year, which is the one. So 2% lower, 1% lower. And then the third year and on, I go up to a 9%, or I would hypothetically if I was staying with the 2-1 buy down. I'm not, I'm going with the conventional. But the reason we did it and the reason the money was so worth it is because for my first year, I'm only paying that 7% interest rate. So when I refinance and go over to that conventional loan, I could stay at a 7% or it could be lower at that time. We really don't know what it's going to look like. There's not really a chance that going from bank statement to conventional with my credit score, it's going to be higher than 7%. So if it stays at 7%, great. I already know I can afford it. Obviously, I know that I could have afforded it at 9% too, or else I wouldn't have done the whole thing that I did. That would have been a really silly decision. And so I can afford it no matter what, but a lower interest rate would obviously be great because you look at the price that you're paying for your house. And then when you're adding 7% interest on that, it really adds up, So like you want to be mindful of that interest rate. And so we did the 2-1 buy down. I felt really good about that. And then I have free refinancing. So in 6 months, which is going to be right around when I file taxes for this year, I can refinance to that conventional and then get a lower interest rate, which is going to be great. So where was I? Oh my God, it feels like part 15, who the fuck did I marry? Except it's like part 15, I bought a house. That's how it feels. Okay, so lenders start going through all of my banking information. They want to know how much money I have, where I have it. They want to know what accounts it's coming from, going to. They want to know everything, which rightfully so. It is a really big investment and they want to make sure that I have it all. So at this time, they need to see that I have enough for closing. They need to see that I have enough for my down payment, and they need to see that I have enough in reserves. These are the three big things that they want to see. Closing costs is everything from lender fees to having enough money for your insurance for a year, for your escrow account, for what else is in closing? I mean, everything is in closing fees. It feels like everything is one big closing fee. Closing fee is usually between 1% and 3% of the house, right? And then your down payment. Down payment, depending on the loan you get, can be anywhere from 3.5% to 20% plus of the house. You could put down payment of 70% on the house if you wanted to. That's your prerogative. I put down a considerable amount on the house, a very respectable, a very cutesy, a very demure amount on the house. I felt good about it. Everyone felt good about it. So I put that down. So by the time that they needed to see that I had my closing, my reserves, and my down payment, it was a considerable chunk of change, honey. And the thing about reserves is that different lenders will want you to have different amounts of reserves. Some will want you to have 6 months, some will want you to have 2 months, some will want you to have a year. It really depends on the lender and how rigid they are with their financial constraints, right? And so my lender wanted me to have 6 months of reserves in the bank. So 6 months of reserves for me looked like having 6 months of the mortgage payment, of home insurance, and of what else? Oh, taxes of the house. So everything that I pay towards the house, I needed to have 6 months of that wasn't being used for anything else. It didn't have to be liquid. It could be in stocks, it could be in retirement, it could be wherever, but I had to have it. And so I had that luckily in stocks. And what I told myself was like, what I had in my investments was money I was not touching. I wasn't taking any of it out to pay for anything else. I wasn't touching it at all. That was like, that is money that I am not fucking around with. And so that worked out because that just served as my reserves for them. And then I also had a reserve amount that I wanted for myself. So I had enough in like my cash flow and in my investments and whatever for me to have my personal reserves that I was comfortable with, because not only was I not using that for what I had my investments for, like the down payment and all that stuff, I wasn't using it for like anything. Like that is money that is not getting touched because it's in there for a reason, right? It's in there to build wealth. So I wanted it to continue building wealth. So, and then I had my personal like savings that I was like, I'm not going below this number. This is money that I want to have if something comes up to the house. Like if I need a new roof or whatever. But lo and behold, they replaced my roof completely for me before I moved in. So I have a brand new roof, which is really great news, because if you bought a house, you know how scary it can be to look at that roof or get that inspection back and be like, oh, that needs to get replaced in the next 2 years. Because while they may say the next 2 years, your insurance can say you need to replace that roof immediately after your close or we will not insure you, which is really scary because you need to have home insurance, right? And so if you don't replace that roof, which can be a really big expense, then you are completely out of luck with home insurance. Because the thing about not having home insurance is that a lot of lenders won't give you the money because home insurance is the way that everyone's protected. And so that can feel like a really, really stressful situation. But the roof is brand new. So my insurance is like, yeah, great, whatever. And then my premium went down a little bit, which is also really great news. So oh my God, where was I? I feel like I've been talking for hours. So they have all of that information. They have what's in my reserves. They have what's in my bank account. And then I get what's called a conditional approval. And so they needed to see in more detail all of the money that I had, everything going on. I mean, they wanted to see details on details. Like they were like, we're not fucking with screenshots. Print us out statements for these specific days. We need to know where this money came in and we need to know exactly what it came from. And which luckily I'm not lying and scheming and cheating and stealing. Like all the money that I have is money that I earned. And they also want to make sure that I'm not getting any undisclosed gifts from family members. And so an undisclosed gift would be like, oh, if a family member just wants to casually slide you $30K for your down payment, but nobody wants to report that, that needs to be reported for whatever reason. it needs to be reported. And that wasn't happening for me. I wasn't getting any undisclosed gifts or any disclosed gifts. I bought the house entirely by myself, which I'm really, really proud of. But I would have loved if somebody wanted to slide me a little 30K, would have made my day. But I slid myself the 30K, period. I know that's right. So went ahead and sent over all that information that they wanted to see. And then I got fully approved. But this process took so long because I was sending stuff and then they needed a letter from my CPA. You guys, this letter from my CPA made my stomach churn. It needed to be the most specific letter in the world. They basically had questions about the formation of my LLC and when I started getting paid for content creation, and they wanted to know why there was a discrepancy between when I started content creation and when I opened an LLC. They wanted to know exactly why that happened. They wanted to know how much money I made in between the process. I mean, they wanted to know everything. So my CPA, who at the time I have gotten a new one since then, thank God, but he was not the most reliable. So I was texting him and I was like, hey, I know that we've had our bumps in the road. I need so badly for you to lock the fuck in right now. I need you to write this letter like it is the Declaration of Independence. What am I being free from? The shackles of renting. Please get to that computer and write this letter now. Now. And I had to do that 3 times. So you can imagine how that felt. Mind you, I had just fired him because he was doing a shitty job on my taxes. So I'm going to him and I'm like, hey, you're fired. But also, I don't have a new CPA yet, and you're the one who is the most close to all of my financial situations. So if you could, like, if I could hire you for a quick minute, but not really hire you. You're just like doing me a quick favor because I had to fire you for a very real reason. So if you could just like do me this one solid. And he was like, yeah, no, I got you. 3 times. Finally got this letter in. I closed on my house on the 3rd of last month. Closed on the house. It was Labor Day, the day before I closed on the house. The letter from my CPA comes in that Friday afternoon. So between Friday afternoon, the weekend they're closed on Labor Day, I close that Tuesday, my approval goes from conditional to a QC audit. A QC audit is what they do for, I learned that this wasn't like me specific. I didn't do anything wrong. It was lender specific, that every bank statement loan they do has to go through a QC audit. That is where the auditor who already audited all of my information, all my bank information and financial information, then gets audited and make sure that the original audit was well and true. I was so sick to my stomach with anxiety that something was going to fall through. I knew I had the money. They knew I had the money. Everyone knew the money was where it was supposed to be. And yet this QC audit was sending ripples up and down my spine every 5 seconds. I was so afraid because, mind you, I had already moved out of my apartment because one of the requirements from the lender was that I showed notice to vacate from the apartment. So if I already showed notice to vacate from the apartment and I am, oh, by the way, in Texas now, the movers have already picked up all of my stuff. It is literally driving across state lines as we speak to get deposited into the home I'm supposed to close on tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. This cannot fall through. It literally cannot fall through. I won't allow it. It did not fall through. Everything was as it was meant to be. We pushed back. Oh my God, I got a call from my realtor's assistant and she was like, hey. And I was like, if you're telling me bad news, I can't hear it. And she was like, not bad news, but we need to push back closing just for a few hours because they need to like tie up some loose ends. And I was like, fine. A few hours, fine. I can do that. I can do that. We pushed it back. I didn't know my cost to close, nor did I have my clear to close until 2 hours before I sat down and signed that paperwork, which I don't think is very normal, but because of the holiday and because my CPA, who wasn't really my CPA because he got fired from being my CPA, took so long to get me that letter, everything was just a big kerfluffle, but we ended up doing it. And you guys, a shout of praise because my cost to close came in $22,000 less than what we previously thought it was going to be. So that was $22,000 that I did not have to wire over to the gods that be. And I was so overjoyed because that added more money that I had just to my personal reserves and obviously to like my other reserves. So I felt so good about my financial state after this house. I was like, oh, I feel even better than I thought I was going to feel. And remember those credits I was telling you about? So what the credits end up doing, it's not that you sit down across the table with the seller of the house and y'all are shaking hands and exchanging cash. It's not like that. Credits are just money that you do not bring to close. So if they're giving you a $30,000 credit for all the stuff that you asked them to fix or all the stuff that you asked for money for, that's just $30,000 you don't bring to close. $30,000 the sellers don't get. Does that make sense, right? So it's they get less money from the deal and you give them less money. So they are in that way giving you the money back. But you have to have the money. That is what a lot of people don't understand. In order to bring less money to close and to actually feel like you're getting the credit, you have to have the money. If they're giving you a $20,000 credit, you have to then have the $20,000 to do the repairs you want to do. Does that make sense? I know that makes sense. So if you don't have the money and you're like, oh, but I'm getting a $30,000 credit, you're not getting a $30K check, babe. You are the owner of the $30K check. You need to write it to whoever you're paying to fix up the house. So that is something that I'm really glad I knew going into it. So whatever credits I was asking for, I was just knowing that that's money that I had to set aside to do the repairs that I was wanting to do. I ended up signing all the paperwork. And one of my last pieces of advice, if you don't understand anything, even a word, if a period seems out of place, if a comma turns in the wrong direction, if you're confused about anything on that paperwork, ask those questions then. You will not get another chance. You, at that point, are becoming the owner of the house. There's really no takesies, backsies until you sell the house. So if you're confused about anything, don't worry about looking stupid. Don't worry about maybe I should have asked this before. Don't worry about what they're going to think of you. It doesn't matter what they think of you, babe. You're about to own the house. So you want to make sure that you feel good about the asset that you have then taken on. I looked through everything. I felt really good about everything. I signed the paperwork. And then I closed on the house. It was done. It was mine. We went over to the house. I sat on the floor and I was like, oh my God, it hit me. It hit me. I have achieved something that has been a dream of mine, but like this far off, distant dream. And I did it. Like I, not only just like any house, but like a house that I'm in love with, a house that I'm so thankful to have, a house that I've worked towards, a house that I could potentially raise a family in if I wanted to, a house that I could host and celebrate and care for people and show up for people and have people care for me and show up for me, like a home. And it's mine. And I did it by myself. So that is where we're going to leave it for this episode. And then next week's episode is going to be all about the home ownership process, which is probably going to be another hours long episode because I have so much to say about it. But I hope that I didn't leave anything out. I'm looking over my notes right now. I think that I said every single thing that I needed to say, from like the beginning process, the middle, the end, the anxiety I was feeling, the joy that I felt. I think I explained all of it. So thank you guys for bearing with me through this episode. I hope that it gave you a little bit more insight into the home buying process. I hope that it makes you feel excited, but also know really what you're getting into, know how to approach this process, and know that there's no shame in asking questions. There's no shame in taking a step back. There's no shame in starting the process and being like, you know what? This actually isn't for me. Like there's no shame in making the best decision for yourself. I know that's what I did, and that's what I hope that you guys do. And I want all of you guys to have this feeling should you want it. But I also, before I close out, want to say there's no shame in renting. Point blank, period. There is no shame in renting. We're going to get more into that next week and why there's no shame in renting. Rent for as long as you want to. Rent for as long as you need. That is it for this week. Thank you guys for tuning in. I'm so happy with the direction that season 2 is going. I feel like it has just been so great for all of us so far. And that is it. Okay. See you guys next Sunday. And as always, I love you so much and I'm on your side. Mwah.